Hello, this is Scott Hoy.
And I'm Kyle Miller. Today's episode of the Psychology Talk podcast is from the vaults. We've handpicked some of our favorite and most popular episodes to share with more listeners.
Since we started this podcast, we've been on a mission to better inform clinicians and consumers on topics in mental health. We strive to reduce myths and misconceptions and enlighten you beyond the many memes or sound bites that try to sell you on ways to better your life.
So without further ado, here's an episode from the archives to do just that. So please do your part and take a moment to subscribe, like, and leave a review for us at Apple Podcasts, Spreaker, or wherever you're listening in from. That would help us to continue our mission at the Psychology Talk podcast.
Hello, this is Dr. Scott Hoy. Today's guest is Dr. Regina Hess, Ph.D. Dr. Hess is a nurse, clinical psychologist, integrative Gestalt and Transpersonal psychotherapist, supervisor, and researcher. She holds a joint Ph.D. in transpersonal, transcultural psychology from the Institute of Transpersonal Psychology, Palo Alto, California, USA, and the Center for Qualitative Research and Performative Sciences, Bournemouth University, UK. Kyle and I speak with Dr. Hess about her career path as a psychologist. She is on the cutting edge of psychedelic psychotherapy training and research in Europe, and she discusses the current state of research and training with these healing medicines. She also shares her transformative experiences surviving the 2004 tsunami, which ultimately led to her becoming transpersonally oriented as a psychologist. This is a personal, informative, and engaging interview that you won't want to miss. Now, here is the interview. Today, Kyle and I are speaking with Dr. Regina Hess, Ph.D., a nurse, clinical psychologist, and integrative Gestalt and Transpersonal psychotherapist, supervisor, and researcher. She holds a joint Ph.D. in transpersonal, transcultural psychology from the Institute of Transpersonal Psychology in Palo Alto, California, and the Center for Qualitative Research and Performative Sciences, Bournemouth University, UK. She's authored various international journal articles and book chapters and co-edited books. Regina is a founder and director of the ASE World Forum, Ancient Wisdom Meets Modern Science, which investigates ancient transcultural healing modalities and promotes their integration into modern interventions, research, and education. So welcome, Regina. It's an honor to have you here.
Thank you so much for the invitation, Scott and Carl. Very nice to talk with you today.
Okay. Well,
nice to meet you.
Yeah, what we'd like to do is just have a person kind of open up and talk a little bit about their journey into how they became a psychologist and how they got to where they are now and their perspective on that. So if you can kind of fill it in that for us, that would be great.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, I would say I need to start really early in childhood because kind of naturally when I was a little girl already, I was always interested in studying people. It just came naturally. Nobody taught me that. I was rather introvert and shy, but very alert and just very interested in my environment and especially also people or art and architecture. So I was just very vivid, always studying that. And I would say from 6 onwards, I had really strong mystical experiences and then started already studying European mystics like Meister Eckhart was really one favorite in my young age, and Hildegard von Bingen. I also studied the Bible, but not for religious purpose, rather for understanding my mystical experiences, and studied the Psalms, for example, as a girl. So I was very interested in like a holistic understanding of life and trying to make sense out of it. That just comes naturally out of me, I would say. And on the other side, there's a very strong creative side. So I wanted to become an artist or work with music, or then at high school age, I wanted to become a designer, but then decide, but I want to really dedicate my life for very meaningful work. And so I would say maybe one important incident was also when I was 12 years old. My mother got diagnosed with breast cancer, and I'm the youngest in the family. So I was the only one at home. My father, big company, was always busy, could not deal really with it. And so I was the only one left with her. And that was like a huge turning point. I was like high in puberty, but then suddenly my life completely changed. And I was, just taking care of her. And it took 2 years until she died. I was 14 when she died. And in these 2 years, more or less every day, we talked about death and dying.
Oh, wow.
She was like my spiritual teacher, I only afterwards understood, wow, this was my first big spiritual teacher in person, Mm-hmm. And, it was quite life, challenging also. After that, I was quite desperate. Afterwards, I would say nearly suicidal, not to a clinical extent, but really desperate, like about such a loss. And then after finishing high school, I decided that I want to become a medical doctor, but didn't have money. So I needed to find self-support and funding. And so I started training for a nurse that I could, more quickly earn my own money. And then as a nurse, I came back to psychology. That my biggest interest is to study human experience, understand, help integrate, not so much from a medical point, but really from I would say, phenomenological point. I'm by nature, I would say I'm a phenomenologist. And so after the training as nurse, I still worked then for all the university years, I part-time as a nurse to make my living. And I worked all these years on cancer wards. So I dedicated part of my young life to work with cancer patients, dying patients, accompanying families. So that's just really a huge part of my life and death. And I feel kind of really at home, I feel I'm not afraid since a long time anymore. I'm not afraid anymore. And I can talk and deal with this. I can help others, families to deal with that. Yeah. So, but then parallel to this work, I studied clinical psychology at the University of Heidelberg. I really enjoyed it. On one hand, because I really felt, okay, I'm also intellectual. I really want to have, theoretical backup and understand concepts and find my own way, how I feel, at home. And but already then it started that I felt, but what I teach in university, even University of Heidelberg is one of the oldest, most famous universities. It has become more conservative, not so progressive. And so I felt, but I see a bigger picture. I see a more holistic understanding of human experience. And so I was always at the edge. I was always a little bit outcast. I was always, searching more progressive methods and approaches.
Was Gestalt the main way of viewing the person at Heidelberg University, or was it more dynamic?
And that was just not for me. So it was really very quantitative science and behavioral therapy.
Oh, okay.
And so we already had to go in another way. So that is when I decided for Gestalt therapy, I felt really at home there. That was like the first time. That was a life-changing moment when I really understood, okay, here I can find concepts, how I think and how I understand life and the world. And I even then specialized in body-oriented Gestalt, which is even, I would say, more progressive and creative methods in Gestalt. And so this was really like a homecoming. And the clinical psychology studies was like an intellectual training to learn how to work in an academic and scientific way. But I was really on the edge and always interested in more qualitative research. I'm always interested to understand phenomena in as deep as possible. And that I would say this is how I then developed my psychotherapeutic approach also. So that's in a nutshell, like how I came, one step to the other. And then I very quickly specialized in working with trauma patients. So I worked more than 15 years in a university psychiatry hospital, psychosomatic department, and I was specialized in working with all kinds of trauma. Of course, sexual trauma is one of the most common, but really also severe personality disorders, also psychosis, schizophrenia. I had very good results in kind of my approach, phenomenological approach. So what I feel what this really can give is kind of a high acceptance. I feel when I look with this phenomenological lens, it's like there's first acceptance, and then I try to, together with the client or patient, try to, analyze and work through these many layers of experiences. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And then how I became a transpersonal, or why I studied transpersonal psychology was then after. So just to make that clear, so I was always also spiritual interested, but not in a dogmatic way. It means I'm brought up Christian. My father was active in the church, but in a very liberal, intellectual way. And he just taught us also, there's more than just ego or, one-dimensional level of living. So it was always kind of present in my life, and I started early meditation and yoga, and in my end of 20s, I went for voluntary work to India and then got a huge research scholarship and worked in India for 2 years and Nepal. And this was all, and studied Tibetan, Buddhism, Hinduism, different cultural traditions of shamanism. So that was always in me. I would also say I could be an anthropologist because since I'm 15, I travel the world and study cultures. So it's always an anthropological, always the bigger picture of everything by nature. And then coming to transpersonal psychology was, I would say, another very big life-changing event, my survival of the tsunami 2004 in Thailand. Before, in mainstream, university hospital, I worked in a mainstream clinical setting, and only when the client or patient brought such topic, I would work with it, but not the other way around. Otherwise, it was my private business and interest. And then after that survival of the tsunami, where I had on the one hand a full-blown near-death experience and followed by a oneness experience, oneness with everything. And when I came back into life, it was clear, I got a second life in this lifetime, and now I have to come out of the cupboard. I have to work in a professional way, also on spiritual levels, and in a much more radical or progressive setting. And that's what I did then. So I fulfilled the live stream to do an international Ph.D. And this is how I came to the US then. I went to California to the Institute of Transpersonal Psychology. At that time, they were really kind of flourishing and really convincing to me. And so I, registered for getting an additional degree, a PhD in transpersonal psychology, with an emphasis on research and transcultural perspectives.
Now, ITP, Institute for Transpersonal Psychology, that's now Sophia University, is that correct?
Yeah.
And so it's changed. You were there before it changed over, I take it.
Yeah.
And did you work with, who's the director there? Charles Tart. Did you work at all with Charles Tart?
Yeah. I started with Charles Tart, with James Fadiman, Stanford.
Okay.
Were there many times. So kind of the pioneers from the 60s, 70s, founders of the Institute. I really enjoyed studying with them. And after the tsunami, really now, it was really like, wow, now I really enter on an academic level what I always was studying. So it was so beautiful. It was so meaningful and really life-changing, and I felt on all levels I really made a quantum leap of development now.
So it sounds like it was kind of on hold for you, but then we had that near-death experience in the tsunami, the second brush with life. It's almost like you were meeting a part of yourself that was more closeted or in the background.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. It means in Germany or Europe at that time there was not really an official academic program where you really could work like that. Yeah, that's why I went to the US. So it was really coming out on a certain level, really not only that it's not only my private business or when a few patients come with these topics, that really this is my calling, what I can offer and maybe bring, to contribute something to the world.
Mm-hmm.
This was there since I'm a little girl. Nobody put this on me, It really came out of my own nature, I would say. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like you've always wanted to kind of look beyond just us as humans, right? Like looking at another perspective, and that kind of has followed you through your whole life. I'm interested to hear how your experiences have influenced your work with your clients and patients. How has that evolved for you, and how has it changed over time? Because it sounds like you started, like you said, you started as a nurse practitioner, and then you moved into studying psychology, starting off as Gestalt, and then shifting to transpersonal or incorporating those two. Can you talk a little bit about what that was like, and what I'm also interested in your experience of what that was like?
Of course, yeah. I mean, it's constantly changed. It's constantly further developing, which makes me really happy. So I feel I'm really, really not stagnating. So I kind of constantly have this desire to further develop. Yeah. But means what I really always say means working as a nurse, I learned so much, so many basic things about life, because in the hospital I met all kinds of people, patients, from all social neighborhoods or communities, and working with so many different people, I learned so much, and then accompanying people in death and dying, I feel it's like to the core anyways to learn and to give also. I just felt so secure to really accompany this. I could hold the pain with them. I feel that was always my gift. I could hold the pain, and in that pain they could open up more, and also the significant others and family members. And then in clinical psychology, through the Gestalt, I really felt so inspired and motivated, and then specialized in, especially body and movement. So it's this understanding, like working with trauma, like there needs to be some movement to come out of this stagnation of the identification with the trauma, or feeling lost in this black hole and not finding a way out. So I developed really very, very solid, I would say profound, own kind of protocols of movement and with sound, and I work also a lot with storytelling, narrative approaches, and creative expression in whatever form. And then another quantum leap was really then when I specialized after my Ph.D. in transpersonal psychology. To put it in a nutshell, then what makes the difference is, like I would say, this approach to work beyond ego. What does it mean? On the one hand, it means, like I would say, the concept of interconnectedness, really acknowledging that everything is interconnected way beyond one person or one ego. That's why it's called beyond ego. And this brings in, for example, the transcultural perspective. That's why I feel transpersonal psychology contributes an inclusive approach. So it has a strong transcultural emphasis. It has a strong emphasis on ancient traditions, all kinds of shamanic traditions, spiritual traditions, also world religions. And the third point would be a transgenerational approach, by acknowledging so strongly the interconnectedness. By its own definition, you need to work in a transgenerational framework. And since I studied that after my PhD, my work has hugely changed, and I feel the therapies are even much, much more effective since then. So I feel the transgenerational and transcultural approach makes a huge difference. So on the one hand, really to move beyond one's own experience and one's own story. So in therapy, I always look at least in 3 generations back. So I look at topics of the parents and the grandparents at least. And even if there's not much information, concrete information, then I use, like a guided meditation to at least explore a sense of what do you think how it was and what do you think what problems they had. And of course, historically, you can put information together. And I also specialized here in Germany on working on the Second World War, First World War. I'm a war grandchild, which has huge impact on my whole life. Even the older I get, the stronger I see the impact. And all my life, some part in me feels like guilty and ashamed about what happened in the Second World War. So at the same time, I feel through this, I learn kind of humbleness also. I learn also kind of a compassion for even the darkest moments of human history, to be able to face to some extent and to look at it and to name it and to work with it. So I have quite a lot of clients in hospital and as private patients coming with such topics of transgenerational war trauma and, sexual trauma, but way beyond that.
Wow, yeah. Well, you really dive deep into the person, and you see the various historical roots of the person. It sounds like not unlike a Bowenian or a family therapy genogram, right? I don't know if you actually use that, but I mean, it sounds like you're holding the other generations, right? The dead. You're holding the dead with the people, if you will, metaphorically.
Yeah. And I work quite a lot with constellation work because I also do I work now, my later work is now very collective oriented, so I work with big groups. I've developed a approach with colleagues where we work with performative arts on stage, like working on the stage, like psychodrama, constellation work, and different transpersonal practices, working in large groups, doing, large group constellation, or even like Arnold Mindell, for example, does. But really with this focus of war trauma, collective trauma, healing collective trauma, and within this, of course, the individual stories, no question, yeah. So I always say this, like the bigger picture, this is my strength that I can give and that I can offer, and to help people to awaken to that if they are interested or capable, Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. What strikes me, again, is the amount of how all of this is played out in your work. Mm-hmm. And so at this point, I'm actually left wondering what are you currently doing? Because I know you have the Mind Foundation, and you've talked about hospital work, you've talked about your own practice. I'm interested as to where are you playing in all these fields?
Different emphasis now, yeah. So I would say clinically, I'm not anymore in a mainstream clinical institution. But of course, this is I would say, largest background is the clinical background. Yeah. Okay. But since my Ph.D., I work mainly private practice, but also I really work internationally. I get invited in many different countries, different continents, in universities or private institutions for lectures, but especially also in transpersonal psychotherapy trainings. I teach research, I teach trauma, so it has developed further in this way. And also a result of my PhD in transpersonal psychology at ITP in California was, of course, to meet the pioneers of psychedelic science, also from the US. So I really got inspired by James Fadiman's work, by Charles Tarr's work, really and then started studying near-death experiences, and suddenly found out, wow, this is comes very close to a psychedelic experience. This is how I started. Studying it and experimenting with it, and then suddenly felt like, wow, even, with this kind of approach, I can even go further to some extent where it makes sense and where it's needed. So I was never in my young age I used psychedelics. I was on the meditation side. That was more than enough for me. So only later I started experimenting and suddenly thought, wow, I want to develop this in a professional way and work on research. And this then, of course, what stood really from the beginning, what stood out for me was the MAPS work and the MDMA. So really it was like, of course, like 20 years of trauma work, and you hear about these groundbreaking results. I thought like, even I would see it as unethical not to study this and, not to include it. Yeah. So I was really drawn to this and started. Then I went back to Europe, and then it took quite some time to find the right networks here also. It's quite difficult, for example, in Germany, not much only now. It's slowly something starting up for research. But then since a few years, I met...
is that research into psychedelics or research into transpersonal psychologies? Or
no, psychedelics.
Psychedelics, yeah. And you mentioned MAPS, and for those who might not know, that's the Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Sciences in California, which is kind of a sister institute to the Hefter Institute, yeah.
Yeah.
So there's very little... Is there any research there?
Europe, and I'm very much, engaged in transpersonal work in Europe, and of course also to some extent psychedelic science interest is included, but so far not so much was possible, but slowly now it's also coming. And since a few years now I'm a member of the Swiss Medical Society for Psycholytic Therapy, which is like the European tradition of psychedelic assisted therapy. So this was founded in the 60s. These are really the pioneers. This was like when Stan Grof was working in the Czech Republic as medical doctor. So I met all these pioneers who founded in the 80s this Swiss society. And since then they are doing research on which is called psycholytic therapy, equivalent to psychedelic therapy, doing research especially with LSD and MDMA. And doing conferences and publications and like this, and so now we are running the first training, and I'm part of this for psychedelic assisted psychotherapy to provide professional. Even it's not possible to practice like that on a legal level, but it is like to provide professionals the necessary knowledge to either deal with clients who make such experiences outside the psychotherapy, which is quite often, and more and more clients are coming to me who know now I have a background in this, telling, I was at a therapist who would not want to work with me or who had no knowledge at all. So I feel that can be quite a stigmatization for such people. And then, of course, really in relation to whatever psychological problems, I feel it's an ethical importance that certain colleagues specialize in such areas. So that's what I do since several years. And now the Mind European Foundation for Psychedelic Science in Berlin was founded 2 years ago. Very, very quickly after their foundation, I joined them, and since then I'm very active. And so there are now several research projects, therapy programs that we are developing. One big step is definitely the integration program that we are developing. So far, it will be the first evidence-based, research-based integration program that we develop. I already teach it in Amsterdam. We have it in Berlin, now in London, now in Los Angeles. Somebody invited us. So it's like a goal to spread such a program like MAPS, you're comparable to MAPS, research-based programs for integration. So that would be on a level, let's say, for lay people who are interested to have some tools to learn how they can integrate their experiences. And we are developing a European network for integration therapy. So the next level, higher level, will be like that we want to develop an integration therapy for professionals, for medical doctors and psychologists who exactly can cover this part. So let's say within a ongoing psychotherapy, there could be certain modules of integration therapy if needed and if meaningful. And so I'm involved in that and develop research on that. And now it seems like that we are about to get a huge research grant for doing really research on psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy and also looking at historical roots in Europe. So this is like really going on. And it seems like I'm now coming back to mainstream to some extent, mainstream psychedelic science research. But of course, I bring the vast experience from my clinical trauma work, and I bring this bigger picture, and it to some extent it's appreciated, so they can see, okay, I have certain expertise in fields that usually didn't work, or I have specialization in qualitative phenomenological research. And so it seems like suddenly everything that I have done makes sense, and I can bring it back to mainstream science. So because one question that is really important, how can transpersonal psychology contribute to science overall, to psychology, psychotherapy overall? I would say there would be really like these big cornerstones, like that it is so inclusive, and through this it can host really many traditions and can give something to the world globally, and that is so diverse. I feel it really contributes diversity. For example, in the European Transpersonal Association, we have more than like 30 countries. So every meeting, every conference is like a diversity meeting, yeah. And every year it is in a different country, and every year it's a different host. So wherever we go, we learn about their culture, about these different countries. So I feel this is huge. And we are in the process of applying to become a member of UNESCO and then potentially of the UN, as a contribution to, I would say, conservation of ancient traditions, contributing to diversity, contributing to preaching modern science and ancient wisdom. So it seems like everything I have done in my life makes sense and is coming together. And now on top of it, psychedelic science seems like one specialization that is just really now calling, because everything comes together now. And of course, this topic of life and death is kind of a huge topic in psychedelic work. Yeah, when you speak for the metaphorical near-death experience or ego-death experience. So I would say I'm really specialized in working with this.
It seems like the pivot, though, was your experience with the tsunami, and you brushed a little bit of that, you painted a little bit of that for us, but it seems like that's been the big pivot for you, and you almost like not a chapter heading, but an entire new book. A new book. One book ended, the next book in the trilogy begins, and next book in the series begins. So can you tell us a little bit more about that, if you don't mind sharing about the tsunami experience? Yes,
I call it was my coming out. It was like, means coming back to life was coming out, coming out to really live and live and study this holistic approach that was always in me. Yeah, and for the experience itself, just to briefly give a little picture. So I was on a just like with a friend on a holiday in Thailand, backpacking holiday on a little island on the west coast of Thailand, and there was just this day, 26th of December 2004. And I did every morning at the beach. I did yoga and meditation for myself, just like. And so on that day it was like completely dark. So the water was gone, the ocean was gone far out, which never happened. It was dark. All the animals already left. So I was. It means I'm very sensitive and I'm very conscious of my environment. So I immediately realized I felt like apocalypse. It was so dark. I had never experienced before. I felt like. The whole earth is going down. I have never felt something like that. And, all the animals, the birds, no dogs on the beach. So I thought, wow. I went to the fishermen but could not really speak with them. They did not speak English. Looked on the ocean, the water was gone. I understood they also don't really know what's going on. And then some people were waking up and coming to the beach, but nobody reacted like me. So I thought, okay, I'm oversensitive, okay. But I really felt really sick. And then went to my little beach hut and just told my friend, I go meditate and pray. I feel like apocalypse is coming. And my friend knows I'm not traumatic. I'm not fearful person. So he really knew something really serious, because I was so out of place. It was like, and then 2 hours later he came running like, Regina, run. And I came out of my head and this big wave was there, 30-meter high big wave. I saw the wave, then I was underwater. And I'm a very good swimmer. So again, there's this feeling, but I can make it. I'm a very good swimmer. I'm not afraid. It's not about fear. I have no fear of water. But it was so strong, I could not come up anymore, lost orientation, was up and down, and could not breathe. And there was this very strong sensation, I'm burning inside, I cannot breathe. And it felt to an extent that slowly the little bubbles in the lung will explode. I cannot breathe anymore. It's burning in an oven, like very extreme. And so I had to let go. That was like, I still wanted to fight, but there was this moment, okay, if I die now. Okay, I accept, I have to let go. And then had this full near-death experience, first through this white tunnel, rather cold atmosphere, white tunnels, very speedy. And then I arrived like at the gate. It was really like suddenly stopped at the gate. And it was like some voice. It was not really a voice speaking, but like a feeling of, okay, now slow down and contemplate what do you really want? Something like asking me, what do you really want? What do you want to make out of this? Something like this. And just was like, since I was used to praying and meditating, I just felt like, oh, okay, let me just go down here and connect with my center and with kind of a oneness. And then I moved on, and in this experience at least, and it felt like then I entered like a very, very dark but very warm room, like a womb. So it felt immediately very comfortable, very like a womb-like big space. And it felt like feminine. It felt like I entered some kind of a feminine womb or great mother, the womb of the great mother, something even beyond the earth, a universal womb. Because it was first white and then dark. So I don't know, even leaving the atmosphere of the earth and being in a womb of darkness. And so it was just totally peaceful and still, and I was calm and not afraid at all. I felt nourished and cared for and laughed, totally laughed. And then after some time, some no form, nothing. And after some time, it was like some movements were starting, and suddenly there were energies, like, polarities, starting some movement. And through these polarities, you could call them feminine, masculine, or whatever, some form gets created by itself just by this movement. And of course, this is how my body understands anyway. Everything's through movement. So it felt like, wow, something very original is happening here. And then it had really like a Kundalini experience, a Kundalini arousal, sexual arousal, like, wow, this is like, this form, this darkness is just creating itself in the way it is just happening. So it felt like a Kundalini experience to some extent.
Wow. I mean, it just reminds me of like Taoist ideas or even Shaivite ideas,
Yeah,
but that's very profound.
Yeah, it means really sexual, but of course in the widest possible sense. And suddenly I felt I understood, wow, this is how creation constantly creates itself. Yeah. And then there was suddenly that was like, okay, now it's enough. And then there was another experience that brought me back to life. And then there was like a voice. It was not hearing a voice, but feeling a voice, like a great mother of the universe, like shouting at me, I'm not against you, I'm with you. Really, like this, like, you don't get it, I just show you creation, that's all, I'm not against you. And then I remember the next thing that I was thrown back onto land. It was like a lightning striking through my body. And it felt in this moment I was synchronizing with the wave because there was so much movement. I think it was inside and outside. And something synchronized me with the tsunami wave, it felt. But I was thrown back, not far out. I was thrown back. So this is the miracle. How could I be thrown back onto land, because the wave was going out. Yeah. So, and I landed on a palm tree and just got up and started running. Nothing happened to me.
Wow. So you were fine. You were entirely fine. Not a broken bone, not a scratch, nothing. Wow. Mm-hmm. Wow. You must have had some survival guilt as you surveyed the scene and as the shock of what happened came back at some point. Maybe some survival guilt or I'm not sure, but...
My spiritual connection had definitely helped me a lot. My meditation skills helped me a lot. I feel my connection to movement helped me a lot. I feel on an instinct level, like whales could move in the water, something like this. I could synchronize. This helped me. I feel really the fearlessness helped me definitely a lot. The fearlessness beyond my human life. Yeah. But it was what I got taught was like, what? I show you creation now, you see it. Yeah, you get the full picture. You see everything. I give you everything, and then coming back into life, immediately it was like, now I have to come out of the cupboard. I have to speak about all this. I have to work in such a way. I have to give this to other people. I want to study on an academic level like this. Immediately I knew, okay, now I do a Ph.D. and I will find the right institute and But then quite a difficult period came because even there now, coming back into real life, this is like after a psychedelic trip when you suddenly come back into daily life and it's not all so nice. So on the one hand, there was mass destruction, to an extent you cannot imagine. Like I was standing on the battlefield, yeah. And when I came back to Bangkok, I really got more or less like a psychological crash down, like, was so many desperate people searching for people. That really struck me so much, having lost so many people. So this is when this feeling started. I feel guilty. I feel ashamed that I have survived. And so I was kind of trying to hide that I survived. I'm just coming from this island and have survived. And then went back to Germany and did psychotherapy in a preventive way. I didn't really have strong acute symptoms, but I had this feeling I want to really care for integration for this experience. And it took a long time to integrate. And in the beginning, it was really about guilt and shame, how I could survive. And so many have lost their lives. So many are suffering, having lost somebody. And very, very quickly we found that there were parallels for the Second and First World War because, it felt like even like something like that. How could I survive when so many people were killed in the concentration camp? Let's say something like that. Yeah. It was connected biographically.
Wow.
It took a long time. Means like 6 years probably. I would not speak at all about it. Maybe after 8 years, I started speaking in selected circles, and maybe after 10 years, I could speak in a way that I not crying, Now means I'm totally over it. Now it's really no problem at all. And a few years, like maybe after 10 years, I started also including, such experience in my conference presentations. And I wrote poems that I presented. Now I'm really over it, but it took a long time. And this is, of course, an example I can always use with my patients. When they're very impatient and they feel they don't see progress, I tell them, adjust my tsunami example. 10 to 15 years of self-work. Yeah? Of course, in a positive way, I would say my tsunami was absolutely on the side of post-traumatic growth, Of course, you don't always have it in such an extent that it's on the side of growth and resilience, like it's totally confirmation of my resilience, totally confirmation of my interest, my joy for life, and love, It's very empowering, actually, very empowering.
Yeah.
It feels like an initiation on a spiritual level, I would say. Of course, not an initiation that I have chosen or somebody put on me, but as it turned out, it feels like my deepest initiation so far.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like that experience brought you to your own next level. As you were speaking, it was like you were hit by the tsunami and swept up into it, and then you went internal and you started to, like you said, you were kind of, you could see how everything works so that you could bring that back to the work that you do. Mm-hmm. That's really powerful. I can't even imagine, well, I guess I can imagine. I was envisioning it in my head as you were speaking. But to have that experience and to bring that back to help others that's so powerful.
And the biggest difference is when the tsunami, I was already conscious. I was already very conscious. So when I entered the tsunami, the whole thing, I was conscious about it. When I say I felt apocalypse is coming, so I was conscious about it. Whereas my other I had other near-death experiences, even already prenatal complications my mother had with me, where we nearly died, and car accidents where I should have died. But this was unconscious, of course. But now with the tsunami, I consciously entered. I entered with consciousness, and I feel this makes a huge difference. And I feel in this level that I actively brought already a certain level of consciousness. I could see what I see. Yeah.
Did you come to the realization of your own birth trauma? Did that come after this experience in that 10 to 15 years of healing, or did you know that previously?
I did know to some extent, but afterwards, on a much deeper level, I felt I could really reach these deep waters, because it felt like, wow, what I potentially experienced in the prenatal womb probably is comparable to the tsunami.
Mm. Wow.
Well, it's such a powerful description, and obviously an amazing, powerful experience for you, Regina. Have you held that experience of being in the womb of the cosmic mother and seeing how creation, feeling how it's created through opposites kind of commingling? Have you ever held that in your meditative states or spaces? Have you used that as part of your meditation? And have you used that in workshops or as a visualization or hypnotic suggestion for people or trance states with the work you do with people, like some variation of that?
Yeah, I work a lot with this picture. Yeah, I always talk about it as embedded in this experience. I just briefly mentioned this experience because I feel then people get an idea that I really talk about my experience, not just about something theoretically that I have studied, and that I can give it in such a way that after 10, 15 years of integration, I start working with it. So I always work with these metaphors and in ways that I can. I always work also with the water and the fire element, because this is the tsunami. It's the volcano in the water. And of course, the water is all the feminine, the creation, the waters of creation, the waters of the womb. So this is kind of like a red thread throughout my whole work. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Very powerful. It is very powerful. I got very quiet because I'm actually trying to take all of this in. It's really powerful, and I'm usually pretty good at coming up with questions, but
it's kind of self-explanatory. Okay, yeah. We're done.
Yeah.
You said it all, right? You said it all.
I'm so caught up in your experience, and you really brought me into it with your description. And I really appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. And sharing that is very powerful. And even though it doesn't bother you anymore, as you say, Regina, it's still very it's still very revealing, It's a very personal, and so it takes some courage to do it, even in public here on a podcast.
Yeah.
But give us 15 years and we'll figure it out like you did. We'll probably we'll take.
Okay, let's schedule the next interview for that.
We'll integrate. We'll work on integration now.
Good idea.
Well, okay, so it sounds like the to the fore of what you're doing is the teaching of the transpersonal techniques, right? Are you doing any clinical work still, or mostly just the teaching?
Means it's always combined with the clinical. So I really always tell all the people, you need to have strong enough clinical background to do the work that we do. Because otherwise you don't know what you do, and you don't know with what patient you can do what or not. So really, I really teach, let's say the roots are always clinical, and then I spread in the transcultural, transpersonal, and then on top I put the psychedelic science. Mm-hmm. And that was another coming out. So it seems like that's really a topic also, this kind of coming out in a certain way that is, I would even call it a transpersonal activism. Maybe that could be a good closure also for, so what? Okay, I had a great experience and I can maybe help some people. So what? But I'm really always I'm really engaged in big organizations, European Transpersonal Association, International Transpersonal Association, 2 big psychedelic societies now here, organizations in Europe. So I always want to have an impact on a meta level. And the older I get, I don't care anymore, for my career. So it was a coming out to say, okay, I really want to contribute to psychedelic science and in a way of global transpersonal activism. Really, I'm interested in not so much clinical work. Others can do that, clinical research, psychedelic research, but more like psychoeducation for general population. This is really my interest. But in very creative ways, in artistic ways. So my goal for the future, especially for Amsterdam also, which is very progressive, landscape, to do, like this kind of art in public spaces combined with psychedelic rituals, combined with psychoeducation. This is really my goal. And through this teach, transpersonal, teach research, etc., teach professionalism. So in that way, I would say my conclusion is the coming out was a calling that you could compare to activism.
Yeah.
And it sounds like you're integrating all of your professional and personal experiences, and that's become your work.
Yeah.
You've become spiritually and professionally and individually congruent. Yeah, you're like.
Yeah,
very much.
And of course, the fire underwater, this is my nature, I have to move mountains, there's that drive, Tsunami cannot stop me. I mean this not in an egoistic way, I mean this like in a deep way. Some nature is wants to, manifest.
Yeah. I was I interviewed Dr. Greer from the Hefter Institute the other day, and I put forward to him, what will things be like in 2030? Because we're in third stage trials here, FDA-approved trials, and it's really moving forward. Psychiatrists are moving forward and with FDA approval, and FDA approval is getting more and more acceptable for psychedelic drugs. To be integrated into psychotherapy. And of course there's a MAPS and California Institute of Integral Studies program that where they teach how to integrate and how to work on the integration of the process of the psychotherapy with working with a doctor, an MD or osteopath. Where do you see this in, let's say, 10 years, 11 years in Europe? Where do you see psychedelic integration of psychedelic medicines into psychotherapy in Europe?
Means the MAPS is already now starting the European research sites. So what the European Research Council told MAPS was, okay, you have to show us, I don't know, in 10 or 15 European countries that you will have the same results that you have in USA, and then we can talk about it. So this is what MAPS now is trying to do in Germany. Now 2 research sites will be started, and in other European countries they are working on it. I just met Rick Dublin in Amsterdam not long ago. So it sounds very good. It sounds like, things are moving forward. And it will take time, but it seems like it has reached a certain level where I think it cannot fall back anymore. It just will need time to move forward in that direction, to get approvals that are needed, and then to get started, with treatment. Means with very severe cases, and then after some time more research to put it to more general cases. So this is very promising, definitely, for MDMA. Psilocybin studies are also getting started now here in Germany, in other European countries. This is very promising. I think this psilocybin will be maybe in line with MDMA, one of the first really be administered in psychotherapy or in psychiatric hospitals. Ketamine is quite en vogue also here in Europe. Ketamine-assisted psychotherapy with a psychotherapist and a medical doctor. But we don't have the results, so I'm not so much a fan of ketamine. The findings and the experiences don't show sustainable results, rather than in this moment that this vicious circle of depression or anxiety gets put on hold and then they fall back. So, yeah. Psilocybin seems very promising for depression, anxiety populations. I think other possibilities will come up. I feel we have reached a certain level for the clinical side that things will happen. But as I said, I feel this is not enough. We really need to have this activism on a general population level also.
Yeah. So there's a need for it. There's a want for it, and it looks like it's going to show up maybe simultaneously in Europe and USA.
No. I think at least for MDMA it will be after. I think because only now they are starting the
psilocybin. Okay.
But maybe it can go quicker than it took before.
Okay. And you've seen the results of therapy with psilocybin and MDMA, correct?
Yeah, what they show is really pretty groundbreaking. That really means in MDMA it's really groundbreaking that most of the people have kind of more or less diminishing, symptoms from PTSD, don't fall back. This is really my main interest always. So what is after half a year, 1 year, 2 years? So they usually don't have the relapse. And in psilocybin, quite amazing results with anxiety and depression. Not so clearly anxiety, very good results. Yeah, that would be just 2 examples. In Switzerland, we are specialized in LSD. That's kind of the long tradition of working with LSD. Even like with more severe cases of personality disorder, but in a very, very safe setting, in a very safe protocol, with very amazing results also. Usually, in combination working with trauma and personality disorders, where usually that would be a contraindication, but in this setting, they can
work on both, yeah.
Do it, and quite good results with LSD also, yeah.
Wow, and that's going on in Zurich, right, in Switzerland?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Well, Kyle, you seem quiet. You have any questions for Dr. Hess? Or you still?
I'm still taking all this in.
Okay.
A lot of this is, to be honest, this is new for me. The psychedelics, and I've heard some of the research about MDMA, and so I'm really just listening and really taking it in, and it's very interesting to me. I find myself wondering what that looks like in the therapeutic environment. How does that work? Taking the medication and the therapy. Can you give us a little bit of insight into that?
Yeah. For example, the MDMA protocol that is developed by MAPS, that would be like you have like 2 screening sessions before, online, taking in screening session, clinical assessments with quantitative, qualitative assessment to see about the patient, but means, as I said, this must be chronic treatment resistant, diagnosis. So they have all kinds of, written paperwork about their, anamnesis and all that. And then there can be one MDMA session, then in between again 2, 3, 4 normal psychotherapy sessions, and then a second MDMA session, and then again psychotherapy session, and a third. And now Rick Doblin said that maybe in the end of all the research, maybe 2 will be enough, a question mark. And so the MDMA session goes like 1 day, 2 therapists, usually a male, a female should be there, assisting, so the patient can lay down like on the couch in a psychoanalytic setting. The therapists are sitting next to the couch. The client gets some music, just to travel through his experiences. And usually the therapists wait for the prompts of the patient. Let's say he comes and says, oh, now I want to share something with you. And then maybe they give some guidance, some intervention, but very little. Rather just phenomenologically letting share the patient what he experiences and making new sense out of it. And so far, of course, many of these were, more young veterans from Afghanistan, Iraq, something like that, and, have groundbreaking results, suddenly being able to see it in a different way. This is on a psychological level, being able to face what they did, this kind of, this is really what I did. Yes, I did that. I can hold it now.
So it's kind of a dissociative experience, yeah. Very dissociative.
Yeah. But on the neurobiological level also means the MDMA does the opposite of the PTSD symptoms. So this is really like something life-changing experience, suddenly being out of these PTSD symptoms. Yeah? So this is like a catalysator. And so 2-3 sessions of MDMA along with psychotherapy sessions. And they have now follow-up research, like after half year, 1 year, 2 years, no relapse.
Wow.
And medication on nearly symptom-free.
Yeah. And you said that's three sessions?
Mm-hmm. Within like 6 months.
Okay.
So this is why it's extremely important for us to get this information out there. Of course, in the States, it's starting with Michael Pollan's book last year, How to Change Your Mind. It's more available, and probably in Europe, people are reading that book as well. But it's normal people, people. As Dr. Greer was saying, people don't take these medications and become Buddhists or Hindus or hippies. They go back to being evangelical Christians, or they go hang out at NRA meetings if they chose to do so, or they go to their coffee clutches, or their knitting clubs. It's just a medication, but what it does is it breaks down ego defenses, like I think you were saying, Regina. It breaks down the ego defenses that in normal psychotherapy could take years, if at all, and it takes very adroit. It takes a lot of training and just clinical intuition to even get a little bit past some of the armor of people.
Absolutely, that's what we really emphasize. It needs really senior experts, to do that. But that's why we say we start now with the trainings to have then later a pool of experts who can work like this, Mm-hmm. And now this is only, maybe this is important to mention before we close. So this is like the chemical substances. Of course, there are all the traditions of the plant medicines, also really important to mention. Of course, ayahuasca is a walk everywhere. It's kind of really the hype thing to do. But also there's quite strong research on ayahuasca and addiction, for example. Also with other approaches to depression, anxiety, some good results. Not so strong, not so clear like with MDMA, but really good enough that we can say, okay, we need to look into this also. Or of course with iboga, with addiction, quite amazing results. So now in Netherlands, they're also starting research on mescaline, peyote, San Pedro, for, on the one hand, for depression, anxiety, on the other hand, for cognitive, new creative ways of thinking, for enhancing creativity, because what is shown that most of these substances, psychoactive substances, enhance the new building of neurological collaborations. it's called default network. So it really means this is what they can really show with the chemical and the plant medicines, that at least we have some new collaborations that can help for certain things. Yeah, so I feel this is the starting point where we can build discussion and research in many different ways. And also then the ancient world and the modern world is coming together. So this is why I like my slogan so much, ancient wisdom meets modern science. You know, I feel we really need to bring everything together, not only the one or the other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so it is kind of, it's kind of the linchpin or the cornerstone that can really popularize transpersonal ways of looking at people, right?
I think that's what we can contribute from the transpersonal field. You know, means of course this is not for everybody. Not everybody is open or interested, but those who are can really, I feel, gain a lot, and we can, contribute on a global scale for that.
Yeah, and it must be for the people who, I'm interested in it because I'm interested in all things transpersonal and spiritual, and I use hypnosis and altered states with people in my practice where it's possible, when people are interested in it and it's helpful. So it's of interest to me, but it must be transformative for people to work with these medicines. Do the people who work with the medicines, do most of the protocols allow for them to have an experience of MDMA or psilocybin so they can understand, or do they have to have they must be coming up from more of a meditative background or a transpersonal background to begin with, many of them?
Not me from the transpersonal, I would say yes, of course. They will have, most of them will have different practices. But what I see now from the MAPS trainings, for MDMA training, I feel this is very, very different. But they are able in the training that means the therapist must have the experience. Otherwise, you cannot guide a patient. It's impossible. So, and maybe as a closure, so in September, always end of September, we have the big transpersonal conference here in Europe from the European Transpersonal Association. Of course, all your audience is very welcome to join at some point. You can Google it. It's EUROTAS, www.eurotas.org. This year it will be in Paris, very, very interesting. And afterwards, we organize biannually a transpersonal research colloquium that I lead together with colleagues also. So there's quite strong movement here in Europe, and especially also Eastern European countries are just slowly awakening now. And so there's huge potential. And the East Bloc is opening, and the Nordic countries are kind of opening. So there's huge potential here in Europe. In California, it's not so easy. It means there was just a celebration now in May, 50 years of the founding of transpersonal psychology. Let's say in California, it's a very strong California movement. But I feel overall it's really important that we connect back to the mainstream science and bring what we can bring, in that way.
Thank you so much for your time this is great. I really appreciate your insights, and I feel like I understand so much more about the integration of the transpersonal and the medication and all of that coming together. So I'm hoping that this will help our audience also understand it, that's our goal, is to help people see what's new out there and what can change our psychology. So thank you.
Thank you so much for this space. I think it's amazing that you provide such a space with so many diverse topics. I think it's a great contribution to the society. Thank you for that also, yeah. And I hope we can build up transatlantic bridges. So let's think about that. Also, I'm always thinking in terms of collaboration in whatever way that can be possible.
Well, Regina, we do like to collaborate, and you're most welcome. If you have someone you would like to interview and provide us with the interview, we can provide it as a platform, and you could guest on the Psychology podcast.
Yeah.
If
you like that, because that way we could have a connection to Europe.
Yeah, we could do a European, once in a while, a European interview from somebody from Europe would be great, huh?
Absolutely. That would be wonderful. Yeah.
That would be amazing.
Maybe we could establish this in the EUROTAS Association. I think they would love that.
I think that having more communication between Europe and the U.S. would be good, because I know that the distance of the Atlantic and the distance of the mentality of the societies here, the professional societies here, they don't always line up, and we don't always have a picture of what's going on in Europe, and Europe doesn't always have a picture of maybe you have a better picture of what's going on in the States.
I know both sides because I studied in the US, and otherwise I think I could not imagine how different it is.
Yeah, it is different, and just culturally, structurally. It's more socialized. It's in Europe, and I just think people think differently. They don't necessarily work differently, but they think differently about these systems. So that would be wonderful.
Yeah, let's do that. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Keep in touch.
Again. Yeah. Bye-bye.
Okay.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed our interview with Dr. Hess. I must confess that I've heard Dr. Hess speak about her tsunami and near-death experiences at a conference in Bangalore last year. I am, however, amazed still by the description of both the inner and outer nature of those events. We are working toward joint interviews with Dr. Hess and some of her European colleagues in the near future, so stay tuned for more of her in later episodes. Thank you for listening. We value your support, so please leave us a stellar review at your favorite podcast server. It would be very helpful. Now, we close this episode with the music of Brendan Ring, entitled Irish Icaro, from his album Kua.